Hello and welcome to Improving Scottish Football. My name is Kieran, and today on the podcast, I'll be joined by marketing expert Chris Samson, who now works at Southampton. This episode is all about how we market and sell Scottish football, because we need to attract more people to watch games and we need to grow the audience, particularly internationally, particularly outside of Scotland. In my opinion, too many people have talked down our game over the last 20 years or so. People slagging us off, Scottish football, pub league, farmers league. Well, I don't know about you, but I think it's time to change the narrative and change how we're perceived. Please do like, share and subscribe. I can only do this podcast with your guys' help. I'm also on the lookout for partners. If your brand wants to reach hundreds of passionate, progressive football fans, please do get in contact. improvingscottishfootball@gmail.com. And with that being said, it's time for the episode. Right, hello everyone. I'm delighted to be welcoming Chris Samson to the podcast. Chris, how are you doing?
I'm good, Kieran. How are you?
I'm very good. Thank you for asking.
Nice.
So can you start out by just giving us a little bit of an introduction to yourself, your connection to Scottish football, and a bit about what you do just now, because that's also quite an exciting job that you're currently in.
Yeah, sure. So I guess my best link to Scottish football is that I started Sports Marketing Scotland. So that was way back in 2015 now. It has been a website, it's a Twitter account, it was a podcast. I guess my other connections to Scottish football are I'm on the board of the fan group that owns Greenock Morton as well, the club I support. And I guess connection to football is I'm currently working for Southampton FC down in the Championship in England. So I'm digital marketing manager there. Bit of a broad role, but a really exciting one as well.
Great. So we're obviously going to be talking marketing on this specific episode. And there's obviously been quite a big, exciting, potentially, development in the marketing space, which is the creation of Scottish football marketing. So we're obviously going to be touching on this and touching on a little bit of, I guess, your dream scenario of what you would really like to see happening. But before we kind of get stuck into the kind of nitty gritty of that, of some actual changes that you want to see, I think when we're talking about the marketing of Scottish football in general, I think it's fair to say that up until this point, generally we haven't done a great job of actually marketing ourselves and selling ourselves, and not just us as maybe fans, because we do like to be a bit it is fun to sometimes play ourselves down. I think more the problem comes when it's like people who are in positions of influence and pundits and journalists start just maybe not slagging off Scottish football, but just not playing us in a good light and almost just making it still a bit of a joke.
Yeah.
And I don't know about you, I just feel like now is the time where we need to start talking up our game. Not like, hey, it's the best league in the world, but like we need to start backing it. And people who have got an audience need to start being a representative and doing their bit to actually talk positively rather than talking negatively about it. Is that fair?
I think it's fair, definitely. I think there's absolutely a space for kind of constructive criticism, and that's the way that I've always kind of approached things with Sports Marketing Scotland too, where I don't want to be slagging off football clubs, and especially clubs lower down the pyramid as well, where, as I already pointed out with Morton, like that's why I got involved in the first place, because I saw there was an opportunity there to improve things, and things have improved massively in that space of what Morton do at the club, absolutely. But I still think there's so much more room to push things forward even more so. But yeah, I absolutely agree. And I guess I don't know whether you were going to ask me or not, but obviously down here now, living in England, like there's a big I've definitely noticed a couple of things. I've been living down here since like the end of 2020 now, and obviously now working for a football club in this space down here. There's a lot more football chat that goes on in the office environment than I was ever used to before from where I previously worked. So you notice much more people's attitudes and opinion towards different things, and especially in football.
So, what are people's opinions on Scottish football down there?
It basically doesn't exist, which I think is really difficult for me to kind of comprehend because, and I've said this previously, and I've said it a lot over the years too. Like it just so happens that we border England, and you've got the English Premier League down here. Like if we didn't, and Scottish football still existed in the way that it exists now, I have no doubt that it would be talked up much more, and it would get a bit more respect in other football circles. But just because we so happen to border England, then it basically gets kind of shoved to the side, and there's all these kind of rules and regulations, which obviously Alex went through a few of those in your last podcast as well. Which I think that situation would be massively different if we didn't border England. That's one thing, but I think that I think there's a lot that goes on in Scottish football that just doesn't register down here whatsoever. And obviously, you can talk about Rangers and Celtic until the cows come home, and their fans, and a lot of Scottish football does talk about Rangers and Celtic until the cows come home. But I think that is basically just what registers down here. And I think some of the stories that I would kind of share in the office from stuff that was happening in Scottish football last season, like it's interesting to fans down here. It gets people talking, it gets eyes on it, like, and that's ranging from terrible subjects like clubs signing players that they maybe shouldn't do, which happened last season, back to like incredible stories the season before where Arbroath nearly got promoted to the Scottish Premiership, or Queen's Park nearly getting promoted last season as well. So like people are interested in these stories, and I've got the office looking out for Morton results now every weekend, which is great to see. Obviously, that's because I'm there talking about them on a daily basis pretty much, but people are interested in those Scottish football stories. And I think that, it's some people's jobs to kind of tell them a bit more.
Yeah, I think it's all of our jobs. We need to start talking about what makes Scottish football great, because it is unique. We need to entice a bigger audience, and we need to start appealing to an international audience, whether that's down in England or whether it's abroad, whether it's Canada, Australia, wherever you want to pick. The only way we are going to grow, that we're going to get better TV deals, is if we start getting a bigger audience and drawing more people into our game. So there we go. That's my thoughts on it.
That's hopefully the ranty bit of this podcast over a little bit. Yeah.
That's my ranty bit. No, I'm just, I think
it's constructive. Like it absolutely is. Like people are so passionate about it that they want more people to be passionate about it. And I think that's absolutely possible.
Yeah. The thing is, I've been watching Scottish football for 20, 25 years, and it just has been a bit relentless. I don't think we can really undersell how brutal it has been. Even just like trying to watch the national team qualify for a major tournament alone. I think thankfully we've managed to get rid of the glorious failure tag, which is great. I think we just need to shake the pub league, farmers league tag that we still get brandished with.
One of the things that I just mentioned to a few people down here recently, because I think there was that kind of social media graphic doing the rounds, because I think Bayern Munich won the Bundesliga again, and Man City won the Premier League again, and there was that graphic doing the rounds of how different maybe the last 10 years or something, and how many different clubs had won those respective leagues, and it obviously that landscape isn't that different. It has been kind of dominated by one or two clubs in the top 5 leagues. But I think nobody that I speak to anyway down here appreciated or realised that no club other than Rangers or Celtic has won the Scottish Premiership since the mid-80s. I think it was 84, 85 season that Aberdeen last won it, or maybe the season before that. And nobody really realised that. It just kind of goes under the radar. But obviously everybody in Scottish football realises that. And that's why, in my head anyway, like my narrative has always been, yes, Rangers and Celtic are there, and they're massive football clubs. They're very impressive as organisations, and what they do is incredible. But underneath that, there's so much more that goes on and needs to be shouted about. And that's always been my approach, to kind of focus on everything else, but have that appreciation for how good Celtic and Rangers actually can be as well. And we've seen that. Obviously, Rangers reaching European finals relatively recently. Celtic doing incredible work under Ange Postecoglou as well, and obviously he's moved on too. So like, there's stories there with the big two, but there's tons of stories underneath that as well.
There is. So, okay, let's get stuck into the kind of meat and bones then of the episode, which I guess is focusing on hopefully new ways that we are going to begin marketing ourselves, because goodness knows, you know, we do have to move forward. You know, if you don't progress, if you don't change, if you're just treading water, you're just going to fall behind everyone else. So excitingly, we've got this new thing that's come into existence called Scottish football marketing. Now, as of recording, we're still not 100% sure exactly what's going to happen with it. But first of all, Chris, can you just kind of give us an overview of your understanding of what it is and the remit?
Yeah, definitely. So I think it was back in March now, actually. So it's already been in existence for quite some time. But the Scottish FA, the SPFL, and the SWPL all came together, joined forces, and Scottish football marketing came into existence. My first reaction was, oh, that's going to get the old podcast that me and Michael Buckle did some great hits, because we were called the Scottish Football Marketing Podcast. No idea if that actually happened, because neither of us have access to the back end of that anymore. But yeah, that's by the by. I think part of it kind of came into my thinking in terms of, okay, well, if it's Scottish football marketing, maybe it'll be similar to the stuff that we were talking about back on the podcast when we were recording that too. So I think the premise behind it that was announced anyway was a centralised commercial hub to revolutionise the promotion and marketing of the national game in Scotland. So that's me reading off the press release. And I think there's a kind of a few bits to unpick from that. So that kind of centralised commercial hub is probably one of the key parts, and then revolutionise the promotion and marketing of Scottish football, basically. And with all those kind of key organisations coming together as part of that too. So there's a couple of interesting bits to kind of unpick. One of the main things that I wanted to unpick was the first thing that they set out to do was hire a commercial director. So that has happened now. I believe it's Brendan Napier.
Correct.
Good memory for me there. But yeah, other than that, there hasn't really been much that we've seen so far. So there's not actually a lot, from me looking in from the outside looking in, that your regular punter can kind of glean from what's actually happening at the organisation, or what the plan is from the organisation yet. So I'm coming at this from, this is my hopeful, a couple of examples that we can just talk about that I would love to see coming out from Scottish football marketing as an organisation.
Great. Okay. So, well, let's talk about that ideal scenario then. What's the first thing that you would really like to see happen, you know, from a body like Scottish football marketing? Yeah,
so I think this one probably comes under that centralised commercial hub type. Well, the blurb that was in the press release, and I would like to see them act like an agency. So we know that clubs need support. And I've referenced that there's from the Championship down to League Two, and obviously underneath that as well. And maybe that's where the Scottish FA comes in, because the clubs underneath League Two are not technically in the SPFL banner. But I think building out a team to provide that support would be something that I'd love to see Scottish football marketing do. So whether that's kind of design support, like creative, digital marketing, which obviously kind of falls under my experience. Kind of data analyst as well, which I can come on to in a second, because it's something that alongside kind of research and insights, it's really opened my eyes since I joined the club down here, and maybe even a bit of like strategy as well. So what's not to say that club, I don't know, we could just pick like a League One club, for example. If they would like something to be done there, why not create a brief that gets inserted into Scottish football marketing, and they work alongside that club in whatever they want. So the club might want to grow ticket sales. Okay, well, Scottish football marketing enlist the help of the research and insights team to see what other clubs have done previously, what anything else can come in from that. Digital marketing can kind of maybe lay out a plan. Design team can kind of design up some assets that the club can use, and we'll see if that then works. And then the data analysts can then look back and see, okay, well, you did X, Y happened, now let's try Z for the next time. And I think, yeah, like that kind of process and being able to have that resource to tap into would be something that I would just love to see. I think it's really great. And I guess if we're not going to, again, referencing your last podcast with Alex, if there's not going to be a kind of centralized streaming platform or centralized ticketing across the entirety of the clubs, why not have this kind of support that is centralized that then the clubs can just tap into?
Yeah, this is a real theme that's kind of coming along through through all the different episodes I'm doing, which just seems to cross over so many different sections of Scottish football, which is it's almost like every club for themselves. And there's not some sort of central resource or central thinking that's like, hey guys, maybe if we pool our resources together, we could do this in a much more efficient and effective way. So, and I get, the problem is there's obviously a lack of resources. There's hardly any people working at the SPFL. And to our current knowledge, there's one person working at Scottish football marketing just now.
I think there's always going to be roles for people at clubs as well. And I've definitely found this, like, again, using an example of where I was previously, I worked at Skyscanner, and we, at some point along the time that I was there, we worked with an agency. It was an external agency. They were based down in London. We were up in Edinburgh, and yes, they can provide that kind of the support in terms of the doing. But you're always going to want somebody that is inside a club, that knows it inside out, that knows how their fans speak, that can provide that as part of the brief or work along a designer to get some copy in an asset, for example. Like, I'll always advocate for people to work in football clubs. I think it's absolutely a no-brainer for me. But as you said, that kind of resource side of it, like, people need help sometimes. People need more bodies to just create a bit more time to work on things as well. So yeah, I think it'd be a great approach to take in terms of like building out one of the Scottish football marketing pillars as this, and we'll hopefully, fingers crossed, see it at some point.
Yeah, because a lot of people who are doing those roles, especially lower down the leagues, I mean, a lot of them are doing it on a volunteer basis.
Yeah.
Or, it's the chairman, or it's, the managing director who's also doing the tweeting, and, So yeah, Alex on the previous episode said the phrase, a rising tide lifts all ships. And that has really stuck with me. And yeah, I just think it's in everyone's interests to see Scottish football as a whole grow.
Yeah, I think if we're Greenock Morton and you're looking at St Mirren, like, you're not really competing with fans for fans there. Like, there will be people that might be on the fence and maybe live in between the two, but like, they're not competing against each other. So yeah, we played them relatively recently, and yeah, the fans, like, there was almost 4,000 fans that came out, which was a really good attendance for a pre-season friendly. I think the element of that is the clubs are both fan owned as well, and we've had some great conversations with SMISA over the years since MCT's been a thing. So yeah, I think the clubs should be working together so much more too, which is something that I've definitely advocated, and that was always the approach that Michael and I took with the Scottish Football Marketing podcast as well. And I think, yeah, building that out and creating some sort of like centralized approach to resource that can be tapped into is a really good approach to take for me.
Nice. So let's move on to your kind of second thing that you would love to see.
I think this one's a little bit trickier and probably would require a little bit more thought behind it. So maybe that'll come after we've spoken about it here and I've just introduced it. But I've kind of gone for creating centralized content. Now, what I mean by that is more deep dives into those things that we were referencing earlier on in terms of the stories that happen across Scottish football. So I think if you, again, I don't know if they've changed this for the new season, so don't quote me on it yet, but if you were looking at the SPFL's Twitter account last season, the header image always was coming with a tagline of "This is football." That's already there. Like, that can be tapped into as a unique selling point of Scottish football. I think it's time to start pushing that even more. So go behind the scenes at football clubs, like follow fan groups to matches. Like, and I think, I don't know if you were an avid watcher of A View from the Terrace, but kind of those VTs that they've been creating across the years that program's been on, like, do that, but at that scale of, well, it's Scottish football and it's Scottish football talking about Scottish football and talking more about Scottish football as well. And I sent you an example of one from, I can't actually remember what date it was, but like years ago now, I think 2019.
Yeah, it was 5 years old.
So 5 years ago, the SPFL did a video where they kind of followed St Mirren's ultras. God, St Mirren are getting loads of mentions on this podcast. I'm going to have to stop talking about them in a second. But the SPFL created like a video, and it looked as though it was due to be part of a series. I'm not sure if it ever kind of formulated into a series or not, but they followed.
It didn't. It didn't.
Yeah,
I checked. It was episode 1, and that was
episode 1 of 1, where they followed like St Mirren's ultras, and kind of, it was called like Bring the Noise, and it was following the North Bank, and yeah, I think I would love to see so much more of that kind of happen. And I was thinking of other examples. Obviously, Copa 90 is out there, and they do so many kind of those documentary styles, but I think if you want to kind of create content around a league now, then there's ways and means and templates that you can just pick and steal and copy. And again, we've talked about resource already, and maybe it's part of that kind of agency approach, but build out a couple of content creators. There's already people doing this across Scottish football too. So yeah, tap into it a little bit more and just own it from that Scottish football marketing, SPFL kind of angle.
Yeah, big time. And that centralized content that we create has to appeal to people outside of Scotland as well. This is possibly the best way where we can really build a brand that really reaches, internationally, that could play in Japan or Australia. And the first thing that came to my mind when you told me this was the A-League's All Access, which is a weekly docuseries. I think they've only just done the one season of it, but they're kind of like 20-minute, really like raw, authentic.
Did they follow Jason Cummings for one of them?
They did.
I think that's the one that stuck out to me, definitely.
Yeah, they're not sanitized. They're just rough and ready. You feel like you're in the action. What's Jason Cummings? Jason Cummings' one was called like, it's Why So Serious was Jason Cummings' ones. But they're 20-minute documentaries, like really digestible. They're universal stories, right? Which mean that they can translate and be watched as in the UK just as well as they can in Australia.
Yeah. And
we do have universal stories that could play abroad, but we need to make, if we're going to go down this route, it obviously needs a bit of resource and thought going into it, but and they need to be authentic. So obviously it's not a quick fix, but it's looking at something that could really build the brand and bring in a new audience. And we've seen with documentaries, like, they're so effective in terms of getting new viewers into sport. I mean, obviously Drive to Survive, doubled like Formula One attendances or something along those lines?
I don't think I would have ever gone to Silverstone, which I did at the weekend there for the F1 on Sunday, without Drive to Survive. To be honest, I had a fleeting interest before it, but like now my other half loves it. Like her brother and her sister also loved it, and her brother-in-law loved it beforehand anyway. But it gets people interested. It gets people invested in it as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, my wife is exactly the same. Um, wasn't at all interested in Formula One, watched Drive to Survive, and now she's put all the dates of every Grand Prix for the rest of the season in our shared diary.
Wow.
Like, anyway, so there we go.
Just to touch, sorry, just to close that one out as well. Like, I'm not. This is already happening across some Scottish football elements as well. So the Scottish FA, we talked about the Jason Cummings example from the A League, but the Scottish FA went to Italy and did that content with some of the players over there that play there. So obviously, like Josh Doig, I think was one of them, Lana Cleland as well. So like this is happening in some of the organisations that are part of Scottish football. So it's whether those organisations are then coming together, talking about this, talking about how it can be pushed further. Like that's the kind of thing that I'd like to see next from Scottish football marketing.
Yeah. And it's obviously not just about kind of documentaries, but you mentioned This Is Football as a brand. I've not seen it much. I've not seen it particularly well used. It just seems to be 3 words that I see occasionally at the top of a Twitter heading.
Yeah, I could be making this up, but I think there was like a hype video at the start of last season from the SPFL that it was used in. But again, how do you interlink everything together? How do you bring it back to that term?
I mean, my gut reaction to it is I don't like it. It's just a bit vague. This is football. I mean, this is football. I mean, England could say this is football. The MLS could say this is football. It's a bit of a wishy-washy statement in my opinion. I'm not a marketing expert, but I think we could do better. And given the fact that we haven't exactly pushed it out very far, as in I literally see it on Twitter occasionally. I think now is the time to maybe have a rethink and maybe come up with a better idea behind it. And here, here's a quick something I saw. Grant Russell posted something about the fact that the Saudi League is pretty soon going to be referred to as the SPL.
Yeah.
And he said, now is the time to ditch the Scottish Premiership tag, position yourself as the real SPL, football as it's meant to be. Something like that, right? Just feels a little bit more bespoke and a bit more direct, as opposed to This Is Football, which is pretty vague.
Yeah. I think if you Google SPL, like Scottish football still comes up, which it hasn't been SPL since, God, I don't actually know now, but yeah, there's a few times that I've used the change it back hashtag on Twitter over the time since Scottish sports marketing Scotland's been a thing, because I completely agree there. Like there was something that was already a thing. I think that I looked at it too, and Saudi wasn't as much on the agenda at that point, but like the Singaporean Premier League is also SPL too, and they create a lot of content around their clubs and the league as well. So there's other leagues that are going to kind of bypass you. I'm not saying the Singaporean league is ever going to be, I think all the teams play in the same stadium because Singapore is so small, but like there's other leagues and they're going to try and do stuff to bypass you. And if you don't keep up, then yeah, you'll be left behind.
Yeah. And I'm not saying that, that idea of, positioning yourself, in line with the Saudi Premier League is the way to go. But I do think that now is a good time to take stock of the situation and maybe just have a rethink on and really defining what the USP of the brand is going to be going forward. So, right, should we move on to point number 3, please?
Yeah. So I think I'm kind of framing this one around a few of the bits and pieces from the press release and what we know about Scottish football marketing so far. So that kind of centralised commercial hub aspect, and the fact that the first recruit for Scottish football marketing was a commercial director as well. So thinking along those kind of commercial partnership lines. I've kind of got a bit of a statement in terms of fan first, partner second, Scottish football third. And I think if you frame things in that way, like, commercial deals that you sign should be offering a benefit to the fans. We've already talked about it. Fans, lifeblood of the Scottish football game. Roll out your per capita stat once more. Like, what is Scottish football doing in return for that partner as well? So we know that fans are so passionate about the game. Have you got can you amplify that partner a little bit wider in terms of activations across the clubs, names potentially tied to specific things? We know that Censure a partner, like they've done some content down here with Spurs, where I think they were the sleeve partner last season or the season before that. Other than naming the leagues up in Scotland, I'm not really sure what else Cinch have done, but they're already, like, everybody uses them as something to describe the league now. So they've kind of like naturally become part of the league, which is what you want as a partner. Doing that, those kind of first two things in terms of putting the fans first with any commercial partners, and then thinking about what value you're driving for that partner second, like those two things filter down to the entire game of Scottish football. Is it things like local travel partners? What's not to say that Scottish football marketing can't negotiate a few deals to kind of get some subsidized travel like they do in Germany, or even free travel if you've got a match ticket. Maybe some schools or colleges, universities for placements within Scottish football marketing or within clubs themselves, like doing some deals from a food and beverage perspective. Yeah, I just think there's that opportunity there to think in that way, rather than just signing up the next brand that is going to give you a bit of cash.
Okay, that's really interesting. So obviously a big thing for all of this is resources.
Yeah.
For all this to happen. And as yet, we just don't know how much resource Scottish football marketing is going to have, and obviously what the remit is going to be exactly. And even with the SPFL, like, from my understanding, there's only a handful of people, right, who work there. So there's a limit to what can be done when you've only got a few people, and so much of it will be taken up by basically treading water and just keeping up with the day-to-day stuff. But we need to find a way to drive forward and to create change, whether that's in marketing or whether it's elsewhere in Scottish football. Like, if you stand still, as we've said, everyone else is going to go past you. And to be honest, I think Scottish football as a whole has kind of suffered from that over the last 20, 25 years. I think we have done quite a bit of standing still, and I think a lot of leagues have either accelerated away or catching up and passing us. And we need to get with the times and really start thinking progressively, just coming up with new ideas and being innovative in the way that we do things going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Totally agree. And I mean, the creation of Scottish football marketing, just to tie it back, like, I was so enthused when I saw that. I thought it was a great thing that has happened, and before too long as well. Like, I would have loved to have happened a few years back, but yeah, now that opportunity's there and people know about it as well. They know Scottish football marketing's a thing, so that means there's even more eyes on it than previously, where they know they're now focusing on that too. So yeah, it's got a massive opportunity. I've laid out a few things that it could maybe do. Whether it takes any of them, no idea. Probably won't. But we'll see what happens. Definitely.
Okay, so Chris, I'm going to ask you the question I ask every guest at the end of the pod. If you had a magic wand and you could change one thing about Scottish football, what would it be?
It's definitely a tricky question, because I could probably say loads here, and I'm sure your other guests so far have thought similar, but I'll probably come back to something that we've maybe already touched on, which is maybe a little bit boring, but I would just like to see more people talking about the stories that happen across Scottish football. So, like last season, you had the race for Europe in the Scottish Premiership. You had the race for the split up until the last game before the split. You had relegation being a big story. Going down to the Championship, you had 9 teams fighting for something on the last day of the season. You had a massive derby in League One between Dunfermline and Falkirk, which obviously Dunfermline came out on top of at the end of the day. And even in League Two as well, I think at one point, like Stirling just so happened to come from seemed to be nowhere a little bit and managed to win the league and get promoted. So yeah, there's those stories. You got new clubs coming into the league on a almost yearly basis at the moment too. So introducing them to new eyes, people shifting their approaches a little bit and kind of broadening those horizons, and then everybody hopefully will start thinking and enjoying those stories as well.
Absolutely. There's so much great about our game, and yeah, I think it's time to put to bed the whole negativity around Scottish football and ha ha ha. It's all a bit of a joke, you know. I think that was fine, you know, 15, 20 years ago, but I feel like we're moving hopefully into a kind of new era, where things are starting to kind of pick up, you know, both at the national team, but also I think, you know, the quality of the leagues and, you know, the extra European competitions and everything, you know, more teams going into Europe. So, you know, I think it is now time where people need to start talking positively, a lot more than they do negatively. Fingers crossed that everyone, you know, starts to do that, especially some of the journalists and pundits that are out there. Stop, you know, disrespecting the game so much. Chris, it's been a pleasure. Thank you very much for coming on.
Thank you.
And no doubt I'll be getting you back on later. So thanks again, and thank you to everyone who is listening.